Hello, welcome to the channel. I'm Rob, and today we're going to be painting a Deathwing Terminator in 90 minutes. Right, the clock has started. Welcome back, everybody. Bullwhack brown. I gave this a base of bullwhack brown. You could do this with a brush, but I did do it with an airbrush just to speed things up just a little bit. But the majority of the painting we're going to be doing today is actually using dry brushing and speed paint. So this is going to be a relatively straightforward tutorial. Charred brown, skeleton bone, and bleach bone, all air colours. You might be wondering why we're using air colours to do dry brushing with. I just find that they go down really nicely, and I want some soft gradients between all these colours and all these paints. So I find that actually doing this with air paints is slightly better because we want those gradients. You can see here I'm just using a makeup brush, in fact, to do my dry brushing with, and I'm taking most of the paint off on a lint-free rag, but I guess you could also describe this as overbrushing, really. But when we're doing this, we're really focusing on the volumes of our Terminator. And when we say the volumes, it's just basically the parts that will get hit by the light. So the top of the shoulder pads is the most obvious one. The front of those, the front of the legs, and different areas. But also the great thing about dry brushing and the thing that really saves time with this is that basically we don't need to do any edge highlighting, because we can pick out the edge highlights with our dry brushing. But also we're going to use a little bit of battle damage, a bit of chipping on the edges as well. You can just see there I did a bit too much. I need to wipe away a bit more paint off my my paintbrush there. But you can really see, you know, I've tried to include as much of me dry brushing this model as possible, but you can really see the areas that I'm focusing on. And it's really, I've got a light source coming from the front at a 45-degree angle, and I'm just picking out the parts of the model that will get hit by that light source. The thing about the Indomitus is that there's such big panels now on these models that you can really get that modulation on the armor panels. And by that I just mean going from light to dark on one particular armor panel. Yeah, it looks really nice. But we'll do a couple of things here. But with the purpose of this video was just to create something short, or at least a video that can show you that with speed paints, with dry brushing, you can do things really quickly but come out with relatively decent results. And actually this is all pretty much procedural. There's nothing in this video that requires a particularly high level of skill. Even the faces, yeah, I'll use speed paints on. So we're going to go to bleach bone now. This is the highest color that we'll go to with this armor. Exactly the same process. Just load the brush, take most of it off, and then we're going to focus on those highest points. And every time you can see, even now, you know, I'm just focusing on the tippity top points of the shoulder pauldrons, of the power fist, and the legs in a minute. So you can already see we're starting to get that modulation, that gradient on our Terminator and on those armor panels. And it really works well for this as well, I think, dry brushing, because with marine armor, you know, we have that idea that it's not nice and pristine, but really, you know, these things are hundreds, if not thousands of years old. So and they're probably repainted all the time, they're repaired all the time. So all those little scratches, all those little micro abrasions in the armor, we can show this just basically through dry brushing. So I like it because it's quick, but also it adds a little bit of texture to the armor that you might expect in Space Marine armor and Terminators and power armor. Don't forget the back. Just treat this like as if there's two light sources, one from the front at a 45-degree angle and then one from the back at a 45-degree angle as well. And then we need to hit the top of the missile launcher. This is just a 3D printed missile launcher, but it's not a design for the new kind of Primaris. It's actually a design taken from or inspired by the siege turrets from Warhammer 30k. I thought actually it would fit really nicely on this Indomitus, and I just had them kind of lying around. So as I say, we can start with this highest color as well, starting just to pick out the edge highlights. But you can see there that by the time that I'd finished the back, the front was dry, and you can go back and give it a further highlight from there. So we need to shade it now. So we're going to use Warrior Skin and then some speed paint medium as well, just to thin that Warrior Skin. If we put Warrior Skin straight down, it would just completely change the tone of the whole miniature, which isn't what we want. So we can use a bit of speed paint. You can see how much speed paint medium I mixed there. But we've got to work fast with this. This is really critical. Work fast while doing this. So I would recommend doing, say, a leg at a time, a shoulder pad or an arm at a time, the torso at a time. I did this and then regretted it. I did it kind of the front and then I did the back, and I think that actually I should have just focused on an armor panel at the time. The thing is, though, we don't want it to dry. We want it to shade the armor, but as soon as it goes on, it does start to dry. And what you'll see is, in a moment, I'll wick it away with a cotton wool bud, but it already started to dry. So I did get some, I guess you could describe it as coffee stains on that shoulder pad. Everywhere else was absolutely fine. I was able to take it away, but it didn't matter too much, because I'm going to do a further highlight from here with my dry brushing again. But yeah, just learn from my mistake. And by the time I'd done the front, I'd learned from my mistake, and I was like, okay, I'll just do the legs, and then I'll do the kind of the other areas, right? So you can just wick it away. I did find that I got tiny little fibers caught on the model, but I was able to pick those off with tweezers. That was no problem at all. It wasn't unsightly. You can see from the photos as well that they weren't unsightly. And then we're just going back with a dry brush just to get those highlights. You might be happy with that color. You might be kind of like, oh yeah, no, that's absolutely fine. The color is perfect for me as is. But I just wanted to be more of a bone color than a kind of a dirty bone color, I'd say. So I'm just going in with that mid-tone color that I showed you at the start here, and then I'll go back to the bleached, I think it was bleached bone color. Let me just have a look. Yeah, bleached bone color after this. So just doing some further highlights, but now we've got some shadows in those recesses as well. I guess it's, you could describe it as like grime building up in all those nooks and crannies, right? But then, as I say, going with that bleach bone, you can pick out all those highlights, and certainly those edge highlights as well. Like, this is the last we'll do with this bleach bone. There'll be no more after this, so just make sure you pick out all the edges. But yeah, I've used the same brush. I haven't washed this brush in this process at all. I've just moved super quickly, and that's essentially the armor. But what I did decide to do, oh yeah, I did. There was an area that I couldn't get into with the dry brush. So if there are nooks and crannies that you can't get into, then just use a smaller brush. But you can see that I was pretty rough with that whole process. It doesn't need to be really refined. You can see me here just with a bit of Warrior Skin and the speed paint medium, just going into the shadows. I did this once or twice, roughly, over the whole model, and I wasn't too precise with it, and I just did it on those big areas like the shoulder pads, the legs, and then the fist as well. Everywhere else I ignored, and it just creates a nice amount of contrast. So here I've got some gloss varnish to lay down some transfers. I'm not doing the whole thing with gloss varnish. I tried to use the airbrush as little as I could with this video for you guys, apart from right at the very start. But as I say, you can always brush that color on. But I find that when you apply transfers, it's just much easier if you put a gloss varnish down first. And you can do this with a brush as well. I just wanted to show you another way to do it. So I'm putting Micro Sol down here. Micro Set, Micro Sol. It says number 1 on it. Micro Set is the blue one. And then put down the transfer. You can make tiny adjustments with the transfer with a scalpel or with your paintbrush, just to get it centered, just to get it right. But I do find with a scalpel you can be much more precise than you can with the paintbrush. And then that transfer there came from the Indomitor set, but I also decided to use some transfers from the Horus Heresy range that they've got as well, because I thought they looked really nice, but also literally fit perfectly. I mean, that one there, that chain, fit really well. Then we go on to microsole. After that's dried, I just gave it about 5 minutes to dry. I think I primed a head, so I didn't miss any time. This is a really good point here. So you can see I accidentally nudged it. So just make sure that everything's dry before you roll some microsole over it. And this is just a cotton wool bud dipped into microsole, and then I just press it down and roll it over the miniature. So once that's all dry, I'm going to mix dark stone with wood brown. You can see the mix that I've got here, and I felt it was too brown. I guess I'm looking for a colour that's similar to Charadon Granite, I think would be the equivalent, you know, the old school colour. And I felt this is a good one for white armour. I think this is kind of a mix that I always use, you know, that browny grey rather than just straight up brown, because I think it would contrast a bit too much. Just a bit of sponge chipping here. This sponge is literally from the kitchen. You know, it's one of those ones with a Brillo pad attached to the other side of it, so I just rip it off. I just find that this one, these kinds of sponges are actually perfect for what we do in the hobby. But I'm sure more talented people than I would say, no, you can't use sponge like that. But yeah, I just use that, and they're cheap and cheerful. So just pick out the edges. Pick out all the places that you think that there would be little abrasions on the armor. You know, the feet is the obvious one. There are going to be places where you can't get to with the sponge. So you go to the paintbrush and just pick out some edges. Don't pick out every edge. Literally, no point. You know, this whole video is about speed, right? But just pick out some key edges, particularly around the feet where the sponge can get to. But you also might pick out some bits on the shoulder pad or whatever, and then these can just be kind of bigger scratches rather than just the ones created by the sponge. It's a fun kind of weathering is always, I think, one of the most fun elements of painting any miniatures. And weathering, the other thing I like about it is that it's super forgiving as well. You know, all of this stuff you've seen is procedural, doesn't require a lot of skill at all. So I'm going to take some pure white here, and then all the parts that I'm going to use speed paint on in a bit, I'm highlighting with white. So the crest, I don't even know what they're called, like Terminator, the Crux Terminatus, is that what they're called? I don't think that's what it's called on the knee, but maybe it is. But basically, any places that you think you're going to put speed paint down, it's really important that we highlight these parts, because that way, when we apply the speed paint, these parts that we've highlighted will show through brighter than what's in the background and what's being washed, basically. Now you can also see me doing all the parts that are going to be gold and silver. I'm also doing this process with, and you'll see why a little bit later, why it's important to do this, because I'm actually going to show you guys a speed paint, a metallic speed paint, and you know, see how effective that is. It's the first time, or maybe the second time, that I've used it. The wires, the cables, I picked out in white, but I didn't bother with any cables in between the armor. I will do them black, but I just didn't bother. I want them almost to be kind of like a black grey, a rubberized black, really. So that didn't need picking out. The bits that I want to stand out, those are the bits that need picking out with this white. I'm using an old tatty brush to do this. You can see it's kind of coming apart. Definitely needs to be replaced or become an oil brush, I think. And you can see that the parts that I glossed are still glossy, and we'll deal with those a little bit later. So Forest Sprite speed paint, and we're going to do the crest on this. If you make any mistakes, it's absolutely okay. I made a small mistake there. It just went onto the white armor. I corrected it after I saw it when I was taking photos. And you've got the paints to be able to do that now, and you can, you know, just dab in that mid-tone color and then that highlight color, and it will get you to where you need to be. And as I said, it's really important that we highlight these bits white, because it, you know, the great thing about speed paints is that they just naturally, you know, they pick out all those areas that we want picked out without having to highlight the whole thing. And I often do this when using any kind of speed paints. just be super careful with this. You know, you've got lovely white armor. You know, try not to make the mistake I did. So ashen stone and black, I mixed them together to create this very dark stone color. I think it was 1 part black to 3 parts stone. And this Crux Terminator, so you could do it metallic, right? You could do whatever color you wanted to, but I just felt like a stone color really worked. I think it worked well against the armor as well. I didn't want to use too much green, and I've already got plenty of pops of red on there with the transfers, and I'm going to do the missiles red anyway. So a stone color was, you know, a fairly neutral, inoffensive color to use here. So go round, just use this mix. As I say, it's 1 part black to 3 or 4 parts grey, but we want it quite dark. I did try and use the grey just on its own, but I felt it wasn't dark enough for what I wanted. On the shoulder crux Terminatus, I think it looks particularly nice as well. Some of you might be wondering why I glossed the areas that I wanted the transfers over, because you can still see that they're super shiny. The reason why is because it just helps the transfer lay nice and flat. The gloss varnish helps it to be smooth. It hasn't got all the lumps and bumps from the dry brushing that we've created. So it helps the transfer to be smooth. And remember, you know, transfers, they're not stickers that are stuck onto armor. They're painted on. So we want the appearance that it's painted on. And then what I did with the transfer was actually, once it was down, dried, set, I then glossed over it again. Sand Golem. And I just use these on the parchments. We need something that isn't similar to the armor, so I'd recommend going more down the yellow route than, say, you know, like the normal brownish paper route, because we've basically got all those tones within the armor, and we need it to contrast because we need to read it as a different kind of material. Grim black, and then just pick out all the black elements on here. Anyway, as I was saying about the transfer, so once the transfer was dry completely, I then glossed over that panel again. And then what that allows us to do is get rid of the ring around the transfer. Okay, so that's a really important trick. You can just paint over with gloss varnish once that transfer's down, and I'll matte it a little bit later. You can still see it's glossy at the moment because I'll matte the whole thing when this is done, just before we start with the metallics. But the critical thing is that you gloss it before you put the transfer down, and then you gloss it again once it's down, and then that will mean when you've used your matte varnish, it will look like it's painted on, basically. This is where I'm at the moment. So I started the clock, you know, when I put the first colour down, just coming up to the hour mark here. So all this is going to be super speedy now. So I highlighted the missiles white, and I'm using blood red speed paint. Blood red is one of my go-to colours. And then I was deciding on what the lens colour could be. I did dabble with purple, but because I was like, oh, I've only got half an hour left, I just decided to make it red in the end. But you can, if you wanted to, just put a little bit of gloss varnish on, and then it'll be shiny. And then streaking. So warrior skin, thinned with a little bit of speed paint medium. And what you can see I'm starting to do is just create some streaking with this warrior skin. Now, usually I would use oils, but I wanted in this video for you guys today to see that we create the same kinds of effects, you know, streaking, battle damage, you know, that grimy look, without using oils, which I use basically in every single video. But I wanted to show you another way. Another good person, I think, to see do this with contrast paint is Richard Gray. He's done a Deathwing model recently, and it's super refined, super you know, super detailed. And I almost wanted to do that, create something like that, but just in a super quick version. And you know, he uses contrast paint for streaking, and I was like, oh, I wonder if I could use speed paint for streaking in a similar way. And you absolutely can do. And I would defy anybody really to be able to kind of tell the difference between streaking with speed paint and streaking with oils by the end of it. You know, I think it came out, it looked pretty similar. You just got to take your time. It's just got to be super refined. You know, you don't need loads of streaking effects on this model in any way, shape, or form. You know, just 2 or 3 with something this size is enough. You know, just pinpoints of a little bit of detail, just to show off that little bit of artistic flair that you can do. And you can see me just adding a little bit more battle damage in, just to make sure that the whole model fits together with that streaking as well. So speed paints for streaking, yeah, definitely worth the investment. This is a warrior skin, and I think that it kind of fitted that kind of grimy, rusty color that we wanted to go for. And then you can just refine that, so you can see me just going over the areas again and again and again, just to build up that realistic kind of streaking effect. And this is it with a matte varnish. I've used Army Painter's matte varnish, rattle can matte varnish, and then I'm going to use the silvers and golds, speed paints, Hoplite Gold, and the silver. I have to find the colour for you. It's literally laying about here. We'll have to find that one in a second. Broadsword silver, there it is. The reason I do the matte varnish before the metallics is because I still want the metallics to shine. I want that contrast within the metallics, but everything else I wanted matte against those shiny effects. So this is Hoplite Gold, really nice color. It's a speed paint, so it does what it says on the tin. You know, you can do this really quickly, but I did think after I put this down that it did need a little bit of a wash, just to bring out the recesses. So I used warrior skin again on this. You can see this is just a recurring color for me, warrior skin. I use it a lot. I use it a lot with the Iron Warriors as well. I find it a really versatile color. And then you can see me just picking out the silver elements here. It's up to you whether you dry brush this, but you can see actually the broadsword silver, it kind of worked exactly as you would want speed paint to work, picking out all the edges. So Crusader skin for this one. You'll see in a minute why I never really do face tutorials, but I wanted a simple face because again, by this point I think I had about 10 minutes left, so I needed this to be super quick. So warrior skin, oh sorry, this is Crusader skin, I think I've just shown you there. Crusader skin, we do one thin coat over the entire head, which has been primed white. And just make sure you give it a decent coat. You can see I'm not absolutely bathing it in it, because I will do, once that's dry, I then do a second coat of Crusader skin. So next up, I just did the base, and the base was just done with oak brown. Nothing too fancy here, but again, that oak brown is quite a versatile color because I'm actually going to use some kind of like Martian rust kind of effects or colors on the bottom in a moment. And as for the stone that it's sitting on, I just used exactly the same stone mix that I had on my palette from when we did the Crux Terminators. It was no different, exactly the same, but it will be covered in weathering powders in a moment anyway, so it doesn't matter too much. But of course, I mean, I'll talk about weathering powders in a moment, but it's really important that before you put any weathering powders on the bottom of a base, that the base is dry. So I did feel that some areas did need to just be refined a little bit. This took me all of 30 seconds. I mixed our green speed paint with a little bit of pure white, and then just highlighted the skull, and then mixed it again with a little bit of pure white, a little bit more. You can see the exact color there, and I just did the top of the eyebrows and then the top of the skull, and that was enough. That was rendered enough to be a quick paint job, but I think it's worth the investment just to render those areas, and the top of the wings as well I just picked out with that color, but I didn't do any other refining on that green part. The wings, I guess the feathers of the wings are picked out enough, and I did the same with the skull on the Crux Terminators. Crusader skin mixed with some Hive Dweller purple, 50-50, and then I just did the eyes just to make them a little bit darker, and then basically that's our skin done. You can decide whether you want to do the actual eyeballs yourself or whether you just want to forget about it, but that is the actual skin itself done. And then we need to go to the hair. So I used brownish decay. I could probably have used something more yellow, I think, on balance, because then I mixed in yellow afterwards. But it made a good base for a dirty blonde hair colour. I think this, it looks a little bit greenish, but actually once it's done, once it's highlighted, I think it came out absolutely fine. And I think it was a good base for a dirty brown, dirty blonde colour. And then here I've mixed brownish decay with a little bit of yellow and a little bit of white, and then you can just see I'm super roughly highlighting the hair, just picking out the edges. I really can't stand sculpts and hair like this, but I thought it was really retro and really would fit the Deathwing really nicely. I tend to use bold heads, but just pick out the edges just so it's rendered enough. But you can see I'm being super rough with it, and then just almost using like a stippling effect really to do the hair. And then I've just got some various weathering powders here, just some oranges and browns and reds, just all mixed in with a pot. I just use this on various armies, and then I just smush the weathering powders into the base. You'll see how I seal them in a moment. But I think the good thing about Deathwing is that basically you could use any base colour and it would work really well, except I probably wouldn't use snow bases with Deathwing. I mean, you might want to do if you're fighting on a particular planet or whatever, but you want a little bit of contrast. But because it's a nice bright colour, it contrasts basically with any kinds of bases. I've got a bit of Army Painter airbrush thinner here, and this works great to seal weathering powders. The weathering powders will not look like this when it's finished. It will be really knocked back, but I've got no fear once this has been used that the weathering powders are going to come off the base. And you can see here the finished model. That's it. It's all done. I just glued in the head, painted the grille silver. I did paint the eyes as well. And I just gave a rough bright silver highlight on the edges of the gun, but that's it. Did it take me 90 minutes? Not quite. It took me a little bit longer than 90 minutes. In fact, I'm going to show you my phone any second now. It took me 1 hour and 36 minutes and 43 seconds. So it took me 6 minutes longer than I hoped it would. But hopefully you've enjoyed this video. Hopefully you guys can emulate this scheme. And don't forget, if you like the video, to give me a subscribe as well. Take care, guys. See you soon.